Silver Pine, Colorado, December 24th, 2023. Lila Whitman, a beloved local artist and gallery owner, was found lifeless in her car near the frozen shores of Pine Lake. What initially seemed like a heartbreaking accident on a snowy Christmas Eve soon unraveled into a complex and chilling investigation. The picturesque small town, known for its festive lights and close-knit community, became the center of whispers and speculation as authorities worked to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. But to understand how a seemingly joyful Christmas gathering ended in sorrow, we need to rewind to the start of that fateful evening, when a single lipstick-stained wine glass planted the first seeds of suspicion. Lila and her husband, Conrad, were hosting their annual Christmas Eve gathering, a tradition they'd maintained for years. Their home, perched on a snow-dusted hill, was adorned with warm, glowing lights that beckoned neighbors and friends inside. The aroma of mulled cider and freshly baked cookies filled the air, and the sound of carols played softly in the background. Lila moved through the room with practiced ease, dressed in a cozy burgundy turtleneck and dark slacks. Her warmth and charm lit up the room as she refilled glasses and ensured everyone was having a good time. Conrad, in his gray cardigan and khakis, stood by the fireplace, watching his wife with a faint smile. He was quieter than usual, though his steady presence didn't go unnoticed by their guests. Over the past few weeks, Conrad had observed subtle changes in Lila. She'd been spending more time at her gallery, often coming home late with vague excuses about holiday preparations. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, was now always with her, and she guarded it with a quiet intensity. The woman he'd spent 14 years building a life with was becoming a mystery, and tonight, that feeling of unease only grew stronger. Conrad excused himself to the kitchen for a moment of quiet and a glass of wine. As he reached for a bottle, his hand stopped mid-air. On the counter, partially hidden behind a dish towel, was a wine glass marked with red lipstick. His heart sank. Lila wasn't wearing lipstick that evening, and a quick glance at the living room confirmed no one else was either. He picked up the glass, staring at it as if it could offer answers. But it didn't, and when Lila appeared in the doorway, her sudden presence startled him. "Conrad? Everything okay?" she asked, her voice light but tinged with curiosity. "Yeah," he replied, setting the glass down quickly. "Just grabbing more wine." Lila's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she smiled and returned to the living room. Conrad followed, his mind racing with questions. The lipstick-stained glass, coupled with Lila's increasingly secretive behavior, left him uneasy. The evening continued without incident, at least on the surface. Lila charmed her guests with stories and laughter, while Conrad stayed on the periphery, watching. Near the end of the night, Lila slipped outside with her phone, claiming she needed to take a quick call. Conrad hesitated, then followed her minutes later, stepping out into the icy night air. From the edge of the yard, he saw her silhouetted against the glow of the house. She was speaking softly into her phone, her breath visible in the frigid air. When Lila turned and noticed him, she froze for a moment before slipping her phone into her pocket. "Gallery assistant," she said quickly, her voice steady. "Last-minute holiday plans." Conrad nodded, his expression unreadable. Lila kissed him lightly on the cheek and returned inside, her footsteps crunching in the snow. Conrad lingered, staring at the moonlit trail she'd left behind. When the guests finally departed, the house fell silent. Lila hummed softly to herself as she tidied up, while Conrad sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He replayed the evening's events in his mind. The glass, the phone call, the way Lila's smile had seemed just a little too perfect. Later that night, as Lila slept beside him, Conrad lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The woman he loved, the life they'd built together. It all suddenly felt fragile, as if one wrong step could shatter everything. Christmas morning came with fresh snowfall and an air of serenity that belied the tension simmering beneath the surface. The Whitmans exchanged gifts by the tree, their smiles and laughter masking the unease Conrad couldn't shake. When Lila's phone buzzed on the counter, she grabbed it quickly, her movements almost instinctive. Conrad noticed but said nothing. After dinner, Lila announced that she needed to visit the gallery. "Just for a few minutes," she explained, slipping on her long beige coat. "I forgot to lock up last night." "I can come with you," Conrad offered, already reaching for his jacket. Lila hesitated for the briefest moment before shaking her head. "No need. You stay here and relax. I'll be back before you know it." Conrad watched her leave, her figure disappearing into the snow-covered evening. He stood by the window for a long time after, staring into the darkness where her car's taillights had vanished. When Lila returned an hour later, carrying a bag of art supplies, her cheeks were red from the cold. She kissed Conrad on the cheek and explained away her absence with an easy smile. But Conrad couldn't help noticing the slight tremor in her hands as she set the bag down. That night, as they sat together by the fire, Lila rested her head on Conrad's shoulder. "Merry Christmas," she whispered, her voice soft and warm. Conrad kissed her forehead, murmuring the same in return, but as he stared into the flames, his unease deepened. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and the answers he sought would lead to truths he wasn't ready to face. The days after Christmas passed slowly for Conrad Whitman. The festive air in Silver Pine seemed to mock the turmoil brewing inside him. Snow continued to fall steadily, cloaking the town in white, but it did little to soothe the storm of emotions Conrad felt. Conrad spent his days in a haze of doubt, piecing together the fragments of his suspicions. Lila, his wife of 14 years, carried on as if nothing were wrong. She maintained her routines, mornings at the gallery, evenings at home, but Conrad's sharp eyes caught the small inconsistencies. The way she kept her phone glued to her side, her nervous glances when he entered a room, and her overly cheerful demeanor, all signs that she was hiding something. On the surface, Lila appeared unchanged, but Conrad's world was unraveling. The lipstick-stained wine glass, the late nights, and the receipt for a stay at the Evergreen Lodge painted a damning picture. His resolve to uncover the truth solidified as the days passed. One evening, while Lila claimed she was working late at the gallery, Conrad decided to follow her. He parked his car discreetly down the street and waited, his breath fogging the windshield as he watched. It was a long, cold vigil, but eventually, he saw Lila leave the gallery. She didn't head home. Conrad's stomach tightened as he watched her car weave through the snowy streets of Silver Pine. He followed at a careful distance, keeping his headlights low. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he tried to anticipate where she was going. When her car turned into the parking lot of the Evergreen Lodge, a wave of anger and heartbreak crashed over him. From his vantage point, Conrad watched as Lila stepped out of her car and entered the warmly lit lobby. Her body language was relaxed, even eager. Minutes later, another car pulled into the lot. A man stepped out, tall, with a casual confidence that made Conrad's blood boil. The man entered the lodge, and moments later, Conrad glimpsed the two of them through the lobby's large windows. They greeted each other warmly, their ease with one another unmistakable. Conrad sat in his car for a long time, staring at the lodge. His mind raced with questions and scenarios, each more painful than the last. The evidence was undeniable. Lila was having an affair. And yet, as the truth settled over him, he felt less anger than he expected. Instead, he felt a deep, hollow ache, a realization that the life they had built together was no longer what he thought it was. In the days that followed, Conrad began gathering more information. He learned that the man Lila was meeting was Samuel Jenner, a local artist whose work had recently gained recognition. Through careful questioning of mutual acquaintances, Conrad discovered that Lila had begun showcasing Sam's work at her gallery a few months ago. Their professional relationship had quickly turned into something more personal. Conrad's thoughts grew darker as he uncovered more details. Sam was known for his charm and easy demeanor, the kind of person who could effortlessly draw people into his orbit. Conrad imagined the conversations they must have had, the laughter, the moments of connection Lila now shared with someone else. The betrayal cut deeper than he thought possible. Lila, meanwhile, was caught in her own web of emotions. The affair had begun innocently enough. Shared late-night discussions about art had turned into something more intimate. With Sam, she felt seen, understood. Their relationship was a world away from the quiet, predictable life she shared with Conrad. Yet, the guilt was suffocating. Lila still loved Conrad in her own way. He had been her rock for over a decade, the man who had supported her dreams and built a life with her. But over the years, the spark between them had dimmed. The excitement she felt with Sam reminded her of a part of herself she thought she had lost. By the time New Year's Eve arrived, the tension in the Whitman household was palpable. Conrad had spent the week planning his confrontation, stewing in a mix of anger and heartbreak. He had hoped for clarity, but instead, he found himself torn between wanting to save their marriage and wanting to expose the truth. That evening, the kids were staying with his sister, leaving the house unusually quiet. Lila came downstairs dressed in a shimmering silver gown, her makeup perfect, her smile radiant. She looked like the woman Conrad had fallen in love with all those years ago, but now her beauty only deepened the pain. Conrad didn't speak as she greeted him. Instead, he gestured toward the dining table, where he had laid out the evidence he had collected. Lila's eyes widened as she saw the photographs, receipts, and notes spread before her. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of panic. Conrad's words were cold and measured as he explained what he had discovered. He laid it all out, the late nights, the hotel visits, the time she spent with Sam. Lila's face turned pale as she realized the depth of his knowledge. For a moment, she tried to deny it, but the evidence was too damning. Tears filled her eyes as she admitted to the affair, her voice trembling as she explained how it had started. She spoke of loneliness, of feeling unseen in their marriage, and how Sam had awakened something in her she hadn't felt in years. Conrad listened in silence, his jaw clenched, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Every word she spoke felt like a knife twisting in his chest. When she finished, he stood abruptly, unable to contain his anger. The confrontation escalated quickly, their voices echoing through the house. Years of unspoken frustrations came to the surface as they hurled accusations and confessions at each other. Lila begged for forgiveness, promising to end the affair, but Conrad couldn't see past the betrayal. Eventually, Lila grabbed her coat and stormed toward the door. "I can't do this," she said, her voice shaking. "I need some air." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving Conrad alone in the now silent house. He stood motionless for a long time, staring at the door, his mind racing. He had confronted her, but the catharsis he had hoped for didn't come. Instead, he was left with a hollow emptiness and the realization that their marriage might truly be over. The hours dragged on, and midnight came and went without Lila's return. Conrad sat in the living room, staring at the clock, the evidence of her betrayal still spread across the table. He told himself she just needed time to cool off, but as the minutes stretched into hours, unease settled over him. At 3 a.m., a knock at the door shattered the silence. Conrad opened it to find two police officers standing on the porch, their faces grim. "Mr. Whitman," one of them began carefully, "we need to speak with you about your wife." Conrad's heart sank as the officer explained. Lila's car had been found parked near Pine Lake, a remote area on the outskirts of town. She was unresponsive when authorities arrived, and though the scene initially appeared accidental, certain details raised questions. The words blurred together as Conrad struggled to comprehend what he was hearing. Lila was gone. The woman he had spent 14 years building a life with, the woman who had betrayed him but who he still couldn't imagine living without, was gone. After the officers left, Conrad remained seated by the fireplace, staring at the ashes of the dying fire. His mind raced with questions. Was her death truly an accident? Or had the confrontation driven her to a desperate decision? As dawn broke over Silver Pine, Conrad was left with nothing but the haunting silence of his empty home. The answers he sought would come in time, but for now, all he could do was sit with the crushing weight of grief and the knowledge that his life would never be the same. The discovery of Lila Whitman's lifeless body at Pine Lake sent shockwaves through the small town of Silver Pine. In a town where gossip spread faster than wildfire, the tragedy quickly became the talk of every cafe and corner store. Initially, her death seemed like a tragic accident, a woman distraught after an argument, losing her way on a snowy night. But as investigators dug deeper, the story grew darker. Conrad Whitman could hardly process the events of the past 24 hours. The confrontation with Lila, her sudden departure, the knock at the door in the middle of the night. All of it felt surreal. He replayed the argument in his mind, each word cutting deeper into his conscience. He blamed himself for driving her out into the cold, for not stopping her when she walked out the door. The morning after her death, Conrad sat in the living room, staring at the embers of the fireplace. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floors. The police had taken his initial statement, but their questions left him uneasy. They asked about their argument, about where he was when she left, and about their marriage. Each answer felt like a step toward implicating himself. Detective Laura Hayden, a seasoned investigator with the Silver Pine Police Department, was assigned to the case. Hayden had a reputation for being methodical and unrelenting, her calm demeanor masking a sharp intuition. To her, accidents rarely happened without context. When the autopsy results arrived 2 days later, her suspicions were confirmed. Lila's death wasn't a simple accident. Bruises on her arms and neck suggested a struggle. The medical examiner noted these injuries were consistent with someone attempting to restrain her. There was also evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her head, which could have rendered her unconscious. The cause of death was listed as hypothermia, but the circumstances surrounding it pointed to foul play. Conrad became the immediate focus of the investigation. The explosive argument on the night of Lila's death, coupled with his behavior in the aftermath, painted a picture of a grieving husband with a potential motive. When questioned again, Conrad admitted to the argument, but vehemently denied having anything to do with her death. "She left the house alive," Conrad said, his voice cracking. "I haven't seen her since." Detective Hayden wasn't convinced. As she sifted through his statements, she noticed inconsistencies. Conrad's account of his movements after Lila left didn't entirely align with what the timeline suggested. He claimed he stayed home, but no one could verify his whereabouts. Adding to his troubles, the Whitmans' neighbors mentioned overhearing raised voices from the house on New Year's Eve. They described Conrad as reserved, but noted his increasingly agitated demeanor in the weeks leading up to Lila's death. These observations, coupled with his grief-stricken state, made him appear guilty in the eyes of many. While Conrad was the prime suspect, the investigation took a surprising turn when Sam Jenner's name surfaced. A search of Lila's phone records revealed a series of late-night calls and messages exchanged with Sam in the weeks leading up to her death. The messages painted a picture of a relationship that was far from platonic. Sam, a local artist known for his charm and good looks, had been the last person to see Lila alive, according to her call logs. When confronted by police, Sam admitted to meeting Lila earlier on the evening of her death, but claimed their encounter had been brief and amicable. "We talked for a few minutes in the parking lot by the lake," Sam told investigators. "She was upset, but she said she just needed some time alone." Sam's alibi raised more questions than answers. If he had been with Lila near the lake, why hadn't he reported seeing her there earlier? And why had he driven away, knowing she was distraught? As word of Sam's involvement spread, the townspeople began speculating about his role in Lila's death. Some saw him as a convenient scapegoat, a man caught in the middle of a crumbling marriage. Others wondered if his relationship with Lila had taken a darker turn. The investigation took another turn when a witness came forward. An elderly man who lived near Pine Lake reported seeing 2 cars parked near the shoreline on the night of Lila's death. One matched the description of Lila's SUV, and the other, the man claimed, resembled Sam's vehicle. "I saw the cars there for a while," the man told Detective Hayden. "I didn't think much of it at the time. Just figured it was someone watching the fireworks over the lake." The witness's statement put Sam under greater scrutiny, but it also complicated the case. If both Sam and Conrad had reasons to be near the lake that night, determining who was responsible for Lila's death became even murkier. As the investigation deepened, Conrad's behavior raised further suspicions. He became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours at home, avoiding friends and family. When questioned about his knowledge of Sam and Lila's relationship, Conrad admitted he had discovered the affair only days before her death. "I was angry," he confessed during an interrogation, "but I didn't hurt her. I just wanted answers. I wanted to know why she'd done it." Detective Hayden noted the raw emotion in his voice, but couldn't ignore the possibility that his anger had turned violent. Meanwhile, Sam's alibi began to crumble. Investigators discovered that he had lied about the nature of his relationship with Lila. Far from a brief flirtation, their affair had been ongoing for months. Text messages recovered from Lila's phone revealed that she had been considering ending her marriage to be with Sam, but doubts about his reliability had made her hesitant. The complexity of the case deepened as forensic evidence from Lila's car arrived. Fingerprints belonging to both Conrad and Sam were found on the driver's side door, though both men had reasonable explanations. Conrad claimed he often helped Lila with her car, and Sam admitted to leaning on the door during their last conversation. What remained unclear was the motive. If Sam had hurt Lila, why? He had nothing to gain from her death and everything to lose. If Conrad had been involved, was it a crime of passion, or was there more to the story? As the days passed, the community's perception of the case shifted. Many sympathized with Conrad, seeing him as a grieving husband caught in a tragic situation. Others pointed to his erratic behavior and questioned his innocence. Sam, once seen as a rising star in the art world, found himself ostracized. His charm, which had won him admiration, now seemed hollow. To some, he was a manipulator who had lured Lila away from her stable life. To others, he was merely an unlucky man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Detective Hayden knew she was dealing with a case that wouldn't yield easy answers. Both men had motives, and both had the opportunity to be at the lake that night. The witness testimony placed Sam's car near the scene, but no physical evidence directly tied him to Lila's death. Conrad's grief and guilt made him a compelling suspect, but his lack of a clear motive beyond anger left gaps in the narrative. The case became a tangled web of lies, grief, and betrayal, leaving the detectives to unravel a story where nothing was as it seemed. As Hayden sifted through the evidence, one thing became clear. Lila's death wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of the truths that would come to light in Silver Pine. The aftermath of Anna Carter's death sent ripples of fear and confusion through Silver Pine. Lila Whitman's death had already left the community shaken, but Anna's tragic accident felt more targeted, more deliberate. It was no longer possible to dismiss these tragedies as isolated incidents. Detective Laura Hayden knew she was dealing with something much darker than a tragic accident. The bruises on Lila's body and the blunt force trauma that had rendered her unconscious before her death already suggested foul play. Now, Anna's death, staged so carefully in her locked apartment, hinted at a calculated plan to silence her. Conrad Whitman, already struggling under the weight of grief and suspicion, found himself at the center of a town that no longer knew who to trust. In the days following Anna's death, Conrad couldn't shake the memory of that quiet but intense conversation between Anna and Lila during their Christmas Eve party. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind. Anna had looked visibly upset, her usual warm demeanor replaced with tension. Lila had brushed it off when Conrad asked about it later, but now, in hindsight, it seemed significant. Driven by this memory, Conrad began looking through Lila's belongings for answers. In one of her sketchbooks, he found a series of unfinished drawings that caught his attention. The images were darker than her usual work. Stormy skies, a figure standing on a lakeshore, and in one, a car parked by the edge of a cliff. The drawings felt ominous, almost like they were tied to something Lila had been struggling with before her death. Among the sketches was a note in Lila's handwriting. "It's too dangerous. I can't tell her. I have to handle this myself." Conrad's pulse quickened as he read the words. Was Lila talking about Anna? And what was too dangerous to share? Meanwhile, Detective Hayden's investigation into Anna's tragic accident uncovered startling new details. Anna's phone records revealed she had been in contact with Sam Jenner several times in the weeks leading up to her death. The calls were brief, and their contents unknown, but their existence raised questions. When questioned about his relationship with Anna, Sam denied any involvement in her death. "She called me a few times," he admitted. "She was worried about Lila, said she wasn't acting like herself. I told her to talk to Lila directly." Hayden wasn't convinced. Sam's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. Witnesses came forward claiming to have seen him lingering near Anna's apartment building on multiple occasions. One neighbor described seeing Sam the night before Anna's death. "He was just standing outside," the neighbor recalled. "It was freezing, but he didn't seem to notice. He looked angry, like he was waiting for someone. Sam's explanation for his presence didn't hold up under scrutiny. He claimed he had gone to Anna's apartment to pick up a painting she was storing for him, but there was no evidence of such an arrangement. As Hayden and her team delved deeper into Anna's life, they discovered she had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to her death. Friends reported that Anna had started canceling plans and avoiding social events. Most notably, she had called off a vacation she and Lila had been planning for the spring. She said something didn't feel right with Lila, one of Anna's co-workers at the library explained. She wouldn't go into detail, but she seemed scared, like she knew something bad was going to happen. This revelation painted a picture of a woman who had been holding onto a secret that might have cost her her life. Conrad, grappling with his own guilt and suspicion, began connecting the dots. The conversation between Lila and Anna, the canceled trip, the unease Anna had expressed, it all pointed to something unresolved between the two women. But what? One evening, as he sorted through more of Lila's belongings, Conrad found a letter tucked inside one of her art books. It wasn't addressed to him, and it wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakably Lila's. Anna, I know you mean well, but you can't get involved. It's too dangerous, and I don't want you to get hurt. Please trust me on this. I'll take care of it. Conrad's hands shook as he read the letter. What had Lila been trying to protect Anna from? And was this the reason Anna had been killed? Detective Hayden's team, meanwhile, made a chilling discovery while analyzing security footage from the area around Anna's apartment. Late on the night of her death, a car matching Sam Jenner's was seen pulling into the parking lot. The footage wasn't clear enough to confirm the driver's identity, but it placed Sam at the scene. When confronted with this evidence, Sam's demeanor shifted. He became defensive, insisting he had only gone to talk to Anna about Lila's death. She was asking too many questions, he said. I just wanted to tell her to let it go. Hayden pressed him on why he hadn't mentioned this earlier, but Sam refused to elaborate. As the pieces of the puzzle began falling into place, the case grew even murkier. A deeper investigation into Sam's background revealed a history of volatile relationships. An ex-girlfriend came forward, describing him as manipulative and possessive. When things didn't go his way, he'd get scary, she said. It was like he couldn't handle not being in control. This revelation painted a troubling picture of Sam's relationship with Lila. Was he the charming artist Lila had fallen for, or was there a darker side to him she had discovered too late? The tension in Silver Pine reached a boiling point as the community divided over the case. Some believed Conrad's grief and guilt made him the obvious culprit. Others were convinced Sam's erratic behavior and connection to both Lila and Anna were too suspicious to ignore. For Conrad, the weight of suspicion became unbearable. He withdrew further into himself, haunted by the memories of Lila and the life they had built together. Every question Detective Hayden asked felt like a dagger, a reminder of his failures as a husband and his inability to protect the woman he loved. Yet, deep down, Conrad couldn't shake the feeling that the answers lay in Lila's relationship with Sam. If anyone had a reason to harm her or silence Anna, it was him. Detective Hayden knew the case was reaching a critical point. With 2 lives lost and tensions rising, she needed a breakthrough. As she pored over the evidence late one night, she found herself returning to Lila's sketches. The dark, foreboding images hinted at an inner turmoil Lila had been grappling with in her final days. One sketch in particular caught Hayden's attention, a depiction of 2 cars parked near a frozen lake, eerily similar to the scene of Lila's death. The details were hauntingly precise. The shape of the cars, the snow-covered ground, the faint outline of a figure standing between them. Had Lila known something was going to happen? Was this a reflection of her fears, or had she captured something more sinister? As Hayden prepared to confront Sam with the mounting evidence against him, a new piece of information came to light. A forensic analysis of Anna's apartment revealed traces of paint on the sleeve of her sweater, paint that matched the kind Sam used in his studio. The discovery was damning, but it also raised new questions. If Sam had been at Anna's apartment, what had they argued about? And what could have driven him to take such drastic action? Hayden couldn't ignore the possibility that Anna had uncovered something about Sam's role in Lila's death, something he couldn't allow her to share. In the icy depths of January, the truth about Lila and Anna's deaths remained just out of reach. The snow-covered streets of Silver Pine held their secrets tightly, but Hayden was determined to uncover them. As she prepared to bring Sam in for further questioning, she couldn't shake the feeling that the case was far from over. Silver Pine lay under a thick blanket of snow as January wore on, but beneath the serene landscape, tensions simmered. The deaths of Lila Whitman and Anna Carter had cast a long shadow over the town. Detective Laura Hayden's investigation was now at a crossroads. Both Conrad Whitman and Sam Jenner had motives, but evidence linking either man directly to the deaths remained elusive. The unraveling of this mystery hinged on the delicate balance between forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the hidden lives of those involved. Lila's passing wasn't the isolated tragedy it had first seemed. It was a thread pulled from a tangled web of secrets that stretched far deeper than anyone had imagined. Detective Hayden sat at her desk, poring over the timeline she had meticulously pieced together. Lila's movements on the night of her death had been reconstructed as best as possible. She had left her home after a heated argument with Conrad, met briefly with Sam at Pine Lake, and then was discovered hours later. But the specifics of what happened at the lake remained unclear. Forensic evidence from Anna Carter's apartment offered the first real breakthrough. Traces of paint found on her sweater matched a unique pigment Sam used in his artwork. When confronted with this, Sam admitted he had visited Anna shortly before her death. "She called me," Sam explained during questioning. His voice wavered, his usually confident demeanor replaced with visible anxiety. "She said she wanted to talk about Lila. She sounded strange, like she was scared. I went over to check on her, but when I got there, she wouldn't let me in." Sam claimed he left after a few minutes, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The paint on Anna's sweater indicated he had been closer to her than he admitted. Witnesses complicated Sam's story further. Neighbors reported seeing his car parked near Anna's apartment on multiple occasions, including the night she was last seen alive. Meanwhile, Conrad Whitman, reeling from the loss of his wife and the growing suspicion against him, found himself haunted by memories. The heated argument on New Year's Eve replayed in his mind constantly, but quieter moments stood out as well, snippets of conversations with Lila that now felt laden with hidden meaning. A week before her death, Lila had seemed unusually quiet during breakfast. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she'd said, staring out the window. At the time, Conrad assumed she was talking about the gallery's holiday rush, but now he wasn't so sure. Something about her tone, the weight in her voice, made him wonder if there had been something deeper troubling her. Conrad spent hours sifting through Lila's belongings, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain the turmoil she had seemed to carry in her final days. Her sketchbooks, once a source of joy and inspiration, now took on a haunting quality. The images inside were dark, foreboding. Stormy skies, shadowed figures near a lake, and shapes that seemed to loom menacingly over the scenes. These were unlike the bright, lively pieces she usually created. It was as if she had been trying to work through something she couldn't say aloud. Detective Hayden turned her focus toward Anna, believing the answers to Lila's death might lie in the unresolved tension between the two women. A deeper dive into Anna's life revealed that she had been reaching out to friends and family in the weeks before her death, expressing concerns about Lila's behavior. Anna's sudden decision to cancel a vacation they had planned together raised red flags. Her reluctance to attend social events and her cryptic comments about Lila painted a picture of someone who was deeply worried but unsure how to act. One of Anna's friends described a conversation they'd had shortly before Christmas. "Anna told me something about Lila wasn't right. She didn't go into detail, but it was clear she was scared for her." Phone records revealed a troubling connection between Anna and Sam. The two had exchanged several calls in the weeks leading up to her death. These calls were brief, and their content remained a mystery, but the link added another layer of complexity to the case. Hayden brought this evidence to Sam, who insisted the calls were innocent. "She wanted to talk about Lila," he repeated. "Anna was worried, and I was just trying to help her figure out what to do." Despite Sam's insistence, his actions painted a different picture. Witnesses had seen him pacing outside Anna's apartment on multiple occasions. One neighbor described seeing him the night Anna was last seen. "He looked upset," the neighbor said. I didn't want to approach him, but it felt like he was waiting for someone. As Hayden pieced together the timeline, a disturbing pattern emerged. Sam's relationship with Lila had been far from stable. His behavior in the weeks before her death suggested a man who was struggling to maintain control over a situation slipping through his fingers. His repeated visits to the Whitman house, his presence near Anna's apartment, and his increasingly erratic actions raised troubling questions. What Hayden couldn't yet answer was the why. Why would Sam hurt Anna? And if he had been at Pine Lake on New Year's Eve, as some evidence suggested, why hadn't he come forward sooner? Each revelation brought more questions than answers, and the growing tension in Silver Pine was palpable. Conrad, meanwhile, felt the weight of the town's suspicion bearing down on him. He had always been a private man, but now even the smallest interactions felt tainted by judgment. Friends who once offered condolences now kept their distance, their polite smiles thin and insincere. The Whitman name, once respected, had become a source of gossip and speculation. Conrad couldn't shake the feeling that Anna had known something important, something that had put her in danger. She had been one of the few people Lila confided in, and Conrad suspected Anna might have known more about Lila's relationship with Sam than she ever let on. What had she discovered that made her cancel their vacation? What had she been so scared of? Detective Hayden's team uncovered another critical piece of evidence, a security camera from a nearby convenience store. The footage showed Sam's car driving toward Pine Lake on the night of Lila's death. The timestamp placed him at the scene just minutes before her car was found. When confronted with the footage, Sam's story began to falter. He admitted to meeting Lila at the lake, but claimed they had only spoken briefly before she told him to leave. She said she needed time to think, Sam explained. So I left her there and went home. But Hayden wasn't convinced. The forensic evidence suggested otherwise. Lila had clearly been involved in a confrontation before her death. If Sam had been the last person to see her alive, his version of events didn't add up. The emerging theory was chilling. Sam, unwilling to accept Lila's decision to end their relationship, had gone to Pine Lake to confront her one final time. The conversation had turned heated, and in the aftermath, Lila had been left alone in the freezing night. Anna, who had been increasingly suspicious of Sam, might have uncovered the truth. Her calls to him, her cryptic comments to friends, and her decision to cancel her plans with Lila all pointed to someone who was piecing together a dangerous puzzle. If Sam had felt cornered, it wasn't hard to imagine him visiting Anna's apartment under the pretense of discussion, only for things to escalate. Hayden prepared to bring Sam in for further questioning. As she reviewed the evidence one final time, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still unanswered questions. Lila's artwork, her behavior in the weeks leading up to her death, and the tension between her and Anna all hinted at a larger story that had yet to come to light. The snow continued to fall over Silver Pine, blanketing the streets in quiet stillness. But beneath the surface, the truth about Lila and Anna's deaths waited to be unearthed, a tangled web of secrets and lies that would change everything once revealed. Silver Pine remained frozen under a heavy blanket of snow, the town's tranquility shattered by the ripple effects of Lila Whitman and Anna Carter's deaths. Detective Laura Hayden had worked countless hours piecing together the chain of events, chasing every lead and sorting through the emotions and motives of those closest to the victims. The closer she came to the truth, the more complicated the story became. The focus of her investigation had shifted repeatedly, from Conrad Whitman's grief-stricken behavior to Sam Jenner's increasingly erratic actions. Each man had reasons to be involved, and each had secrets he was trying to protect. But Hayden knew only one of them had been at the center of the tragedies that unfolded. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as it often does in cases like these. While reviewing a painting Sam had given to Lila's gallery, Hayden noticed a detail that had been overlooked. The image was unsettling, depicting a woman near a lake surrounded by shadows. There was no clear violence in the image, but the atmosphere was unmistakable: fear, desperation, and the presence of another figure just out of reach. The painting, combined with Lila's journal entries and the evidence tying Sam to both deaths, left Hayden convinced she had her suspect. But understanding how the events fit together required one final push. Confronting Sam was different this time. The evidence had piled up against him, leaving him no room to maneuver. Hayden began with the night of Lila's death, walking Sam through the timeline as calmly as possible. Sam admitted to meeting her at Pine Lake, describing how their conversation became emotional. Lila had made it clear that their relationship was over, but Sam, consumed by frustration and disbelief, refused to accept it. "She wouldn't listen to me," Sam said, his voice trembling. "I just wanted her to understand that she didn't have to be afraid. I could have helped her through this, but she pushed me away." Hayden's voice remained steady. "She told you to leave, didn't she? And when she walked away, you didn't let her go." Sam hesitated, his head sinking into his hands. "She didn't mean it," he whispered. "She was just upset." The evidence suggested otherwise. The forensic analysis of Lila's body showed that she hadn't simply been left at the lake by accident. While Sam tried to frame his actions as emotional and impulsive, the reality was far more calculated. When she refused to engage with him any further, Sam made the decision to leave her there alone in the freezing night, knowing the conditions would do the rest. "You left her there because you didn't want to face the consequences," Hayden said, her words calm but piercing. "You didn't walk away because you cared about her. You walked away because you knew what would happen if she stayed." Sam's attempts to portray his actions as a misunderstanding unraveled under Hayden's questioning. His guilt was evident not just in his words, but in his body language, his inability to look her in the eye as she laid out the evidence. The case of Anna Carter, however, required a different approach. Unlike Lila's death, which stemmed from Sam's inability to let go, Anna's was the result of her determination to protect her friend. In the weeks leading up to her death, Anna had grown increasingly concerned about Lila's well-being. She had noticed the tension between Lila and Sam and had reached out to him in an effort to de-escalate the situation. According to witnesses, Anna had been vocal about her concerns, confiding in close friends that she didn't trust Sam and believed he was manipulating Lila. This sentiment was echoed in her canceled vacation plans, a decision she made after realizing that Lila wasn't ready to leave her situation. Sam admitted to visiting Anna's apartment the night she died, claiming he wanted to clear the air. "She kept calling me, saying I was putting Lila in danger," he said. "I just wanted to explain that it wasn't true." But Hayden knew better. Sam had gone there because Anna had become a threat to his carefully constructed narrative. She had seen through his charm and knew he wasn't the person he pretended to be. When Anna refused to back down, Sam's desperation reached a breaking point. Though Sam insisted her death was the result of a misunderstanding, the evidence told a different story. His presence at her apartment, combined with the tension witnesses had described between the two, painted a clear picture of his intent to silence her before she could reveal what she knew. Conrad Whitman, who had spent weeks under a cloud of suspicion, played an unexpected role in solidifying the case against Sam. While going through Lila's belongings, he had discovered pieces of her life that shed light on the turmoil she had been experiencing in the weeks leading up to her death. Lila had confided in her journal about Sam's increasingly erratic behavior and her fears about how he might react to her decision to end their relationship. As Conrad sat with Hayden, recounting the memories and moments he had unearthed, he grappled with the realization that Lila had been fighting a battle he hadn't fully understood. "I thought the distance between us was just part of the routine we'd fallen into," he said quietly. "I didn't see how much she was struggling." For Hayden, Conrad's reflections added depth to the timeline of events. They confirmed that Lila had tried to protect not just herself but those around her, including Conrad and Anna. She had hoped to resolve the situation on her own, but Sam's refusal to let go had left her with no safe options. The final confrontation between Hayden and Sam took place in the early hours of a cold February morning. The interrogation room was silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. Sam sat across from Hayden, his head bowed, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "You had a choice," Hayden said evenly. "At every step of this, you could have walked away. But you didn't. You didn't leave Lila alone because you cared about her. You left her because you knew what would happen. And when Anna started asking questions, you couldn't risk her exposing the truth." Sam's voice broke as he spoke. "I never wanted this," he said. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could make her stay." "But she didn't want to stay," Hayden replied. "And you couldn't accept that." As Sam's confession unfolded, the weight of his actions became clear. His need for control had driven him to choices that cost 2 lives and left a small town forever changed. With Sam's arrest, the case reached its resolution. Hayden's team had worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, but the victory was bittersweet. The lives lost couldn't be restored, and the scars left behind in Silver Pine would linger for years to come. Conrad, though exonerated, struggled to move forward. The grief of losing Lila was compounded by the knowledge that he hadn't been able to protect her. The life they had built together, once full of love and promise, had been shattered beyond repair. For the people of Silver Pine, the tragedy became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked emotions and the secrets that fester beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives. The gallery, once a hub of creativity and joy, stood dark and silent, a haunting reminder of what had been lost.